Welcome. We are going to be talking about sports and action photography. Now, I want to make sure that I'm clear right off the bat about what I mean by sports and action photography. Because as we move through some of these exercises, I'm going to be asking you to do some things, and you may say, hey, really, that's just not my thing. And the reality is that I don't require that you actually shoot sports for this upcoming assignment. If you're not comfortable shooting sports, and if it's not something that you're interested in, I'm not going to force you to shoot sports. There are other options that you can use for action photography. Okay, so I'm sure, as you can see from the course content, we are going to be stepping up, and you're going to have a shooting assignment every week. And so a lot of the time that we're going to be actually critiquing assignments, talking about how to perform assignments, and improve assignments. There's going to be less lecture time, and this is one of those weeks where there's less lecture time. So my presentation for you is actually quite brief. I do have a handout in the online workspace for you, so please do read that handout. That's helpful for shooting specifically sports, but I'm going to talk about some other things, just some settings on your camera, just to make sure that you're comfortable with shooting action photography. So the first thing with shooting action photography is our approach to shooting action photography. So we have two choices when we shoot action photography. We can choose to shoot to stop motion, or we can choose to shoot to allow motion, to show motion blur. So those, and I want you to be experimenting with both. In fact, as you look at the rubric, you'll see that I'm actually asking you to try something called a panning shot, which is not stopping motion at all. Okay, so we're making a choice. If we want to freeze a moment in time, we're going to stop a moment of action and perhaps show some emotion of that moment. And the example that I like to use is, in sports photography, the great moment when someone is, making a hit or scoring or, getting past someone, the great impact of that photograph is less likely just the action that's going on, although that is important. But when you stop that moment, if you've gotten the image tight enough, you can see the person, you can see the expression on their face. And normally this is not like a posed smiling shot. That's a good thing when we're talking about sports photography. You want to show that concentration, that aggression, that anguish, perhaps. So there's still emotion and storytelling to sports photography. In fact, perhaps more so than a lot of other forms of photography. Now, as far as allowing motion to show, there's all kinds of ways that we can do this. And this is where, if you're not going to do sports for your action photography assignment, I want to encourage you to spend a lot of time thinking about how you can capture whatever action you have in kind of an alternative or a creative way. Because, I get a lot of students who will say, well, I'm going to go and play with my dog and remember my rule. I don't want to see, we're trying to push our idea of photography, so no cute kid, no dog photography. So this is actually a bad example in a couple of different ways. But I'll have students who will go out, they'll try to play with their dog and then just take photographs of their dog running. Well, what are you really showing? I mean, unless you get, the dog in the air, the dog has a particularly interesting, look on its face, there's something interesting about the appearance, that's actually a really tough thing to do and make an interesting shot. You're interested because it's your pet, but we're trying to push ourselves and create photography that is compelling to a wider audience. That's part of what we're trying to do here. So as you think about action photography, don't only think about freezing motion. We want to look at what are the different ways we can use that. For instance, a lot of students will get into shooting urban landscape photography for the action assignment, which is great. I know that might not be immediately something that you would think of, but there is a lot of action, and say you shoot it at night and you use a slow shutter speed. So using some shutter drag, that's how you get those photographs that you see of cityscapes at night, where even though it's dark, the buildings are illuminated and you can see the light trails of the cars. That's an extended shutter speed shot, and that's something that you can try and experiment with on this assignment. So that's another great way to do it. Showing motion, there's a number of different ways. Instead of trying to stop the motion of the action, purposely trying to show the motion. And there's a couple of different ways that we can do this, and panning is actually one of them. So I'll go ahead and discuss panning now. Now you should have, I know I've talked about panning in some of the content, and so you should be, this shouldn't be a new concept to you, but we're going to put it into practice because I actually do want you to try some panning shots. It's really a great tool in photography to show something, to give a different look and a different feel. So it's really a great opportunity. So to review, I have to take a sip of coffee. I can't function without coffee. Okay, so to review, panning is when there's motion going on in the frame. Okay, you're trying to capture motion, and instead of shooting and waiting for the action to come in front of your camera and snapping that moment in time, what we're going to do is we're going to follow the motion. We're going to match the camera to the speed of the object that we're taking a photograph of. Okay? If we do this well, and it's difficult, so don't be frustrated if you try this and it doesn't work. It takes lots of practice. In fact, you can shoot a number of frames unsuccessfully before you get that first successful frame. All right. So if it doesn't work out, don't feel too frustrated. Understand that this is actually a difficult technique. All right, particularly for beginners. So what you need to do is essentially you're going to set your shutter speed to a 15th or perhaps a 30th of a second. You're going to follow the motion of a fast-moving object, focus on that object, and then when you feel that you're matching the speed of the object well, you hit the shutter trigger. You continue to follow. What will happen, if you're successful, is that the object itself will actually be relatively clear. It may be moving. If it's imagine a running person, the legs and the arms may be moving, but the head, the face, the torso would be in relatively sharp focus if you've focused well and followed well, and the rest of the image would then be blurred, and you get that really cool streaking motion blur. That's what we're looking for. That's the kind of the signature of a panning shot. Okay. Some other things to think about. Okay, depth of field is important when we're doing action photography. I'm going to go back to sports as an example, although it's not exclusively just sports, but when you're shooting a lot of action, things are moving very, very quickly, and it makes it more difficult to compose in such a way that you're thinking about what's behind your subject. So simplicity can become a big problem. So we purposely want to try to compose with a shallow depth of field a lot of the time when we're shooting sports photography. Because, typically we're further away, when I'm shooting, sports photography, I'm shooting like a 200 millimeter lens at a minimum. Sometimes it might be longer. You guys don't necessarily have that option. You guys are all shooting mostly 50 millimeter lenses. That's fine. Don't worry about that. I'm just giving you this as a talking point for later. Or if you are shooting digital, you may actually have a 70 to 250 or a 70 to 300. So that may be available to you. So I would shoot a 200. I would shoot at the lowest aperture possible on my lens. I have a 2.8. And, I do try to get as close as I possibly can. Okay. So I'm compressing the depth of field a great deal, even though I'm still quite a ways away from the action. So by trying to compress that depth of field, now even though there's lots of complicated things going on, like imagine a football game, and you take a photograph, and on the other side of the field you have the bench, the other team, the stands. You want to make sure that those things are out of focus if you can, so that it simplifies your composition, makes a stronger composition. Okay? Focusing. You guys are, most of you are, you should be all focusing manually. This is a good practice, okay? Now, in action photography, this is actually tricky and a great skill. So manually focusing for action photography, and what we're going to do, what we call pre-focus. This kind of takes me back to my days of shooting sports photography, and when I was in high school shooting film. Particularly when we're shooting film, it's not the spray and pray of digital where you just snap, and maybe you get something and maybe you don't. You have to be more deliberate. This is a good thing. This helps you practice. This is going to make you all better photographers. You can't wait for a moment to happen. You have to know what you're shooting. You have to anticipate, and you have to prepare for that. So, for instance, back to shooting like high school football games back when I was going to school at East High School. Don't hold it against me. If I'm shooting a football game, I don't want to focus on and shoot where the team or the player is right now. I want to try to anticipate. So, as the team would get toward the goal, I would move myself closer and closer to the goal, and I would actually focus on a spot on the field by the goal line where I hoped my action would be, and then wait. So that when the play started and the action comes to me, if hopefully I was right, when the action comes close to where I was focused, either I'm already prepared or I can make minor adjustments very quickly. Okay? So you have to know what you're shooting. You have to understand what you're shooting. So if you are going to shoot a sporting event, that's actually one of the things from the handout, is know the sport. You have to understand what's happening. Whatever it is that you're trying to take photographs of, you have to know something about before you get there so that you can successfully take photographs of whatever that event or subject is. If you don't, you're going to miss opportunities left and right. So the next thing, lighting. This is actually kind of a tricky thing, and I'm not suggesting you guys use flash. I just want to talk about how you deal with lighting and potentially at some point in time how to handle flash if you're actually going to shoot with a flash. Now, one of the things that's really tricky if you do choose to do sports photography is that sports photography is, the venues are, unless it's an outdoor event, or sometimes even when it's an outdoor event, you're shooting at night, but the venues are notoriously bad for lighting. The college has an arena that for rodeo, and when we send students to shoot rodeo, we have to shoot at such a high ISO that the images are just filled with grain, littered with grain. It's awful. But that's the option you have. The light is so poor in that setting that you don't have a choice. And typically for a classroom section, what I do when I have this kind of thing is I'll even try to coordinate, and if I can, take the folks out and shoot a game with some higher end cameras that I have, so they get some opportunity to do that. Unfortunately, that's not something that we can set up for an online class. So what I would suggest you do, of course, again, you have to shoot with the widest aperture you possibly can. For most of you, that's going to be like a 2.8. Some of you have like a 1.4. That's fantastic. That's tons of light. That's great. But in the future, be thinking about if you're shooting digital or if you're going to purchase film specifically for an event, you want to use a higher ISO. So like when I shoot a sporting event, I'll ramp my ISO up to about 1600 if and of course we can use third stops in uh, digital. So I'll go ahead and tell you I've discovered my camera. I shoot a Canon 7D, and my camera shoots pretty clean images. There's not too much grain at about 2000, which is a third stop between 1600 and 3200. There's 2000, 2500, and then 3200. So I will actually push one third stop above 1600. Something for you to think about. Sometimes it is okay to use flash. If you're going to use flash, you need to talk to people first. Don't just show up to an event and start shooting flash. Discuss it with people. In some cases, it's expected. If you're shooting, when people shoot pro events, it's absolutely expected that those guys have to deal with playing with flash. In other instances, they may not. But I've gone to events, high school events, and talked to the coaches before the game and said, "Hey, I might shoot a little flash. Is that okay?" And the coach says, "Hey, you know what? My players need to learn to play with distractions," and they're fine with it. But you want to communicate, okay? Speaking of going to events and getting access to events, that's actually one of the things that we want to talk about is. A camera is almost as good as actually having a press pass. If you are going to an event and in fact, if any of you want to shoot anything for the student media organization, fantastic. I'd love to have those photographs. And I can work out, a press pass for you. But when I shoot a sporting event, I never get asked if I'm media. I never get asked for my press pass. I show up, I act like that's where I'm supposed to be, and nobody ever questions me. So just be professional, show up, conduct yourself professionally. Your camera, in most cases, is actually a press pass. If someone does ask you for the course of this assignment, say, "Yeah, I'm a student at Laramie County Community College. I have an assignment on action photography. Is it okay if I get closer to the field?" Because you have to get closer to the field. I don't want to see you guys shooting from the stands. Remember the Frank Capra quote: "If your photo's not good enough, you're not close enough." With action photography, you've got to get close. If you're shooting from far away, your images aren't going to look like anything. Okay, so you got to get close. If you're shooting a sporting event, do not shoot from the stands. Get yourself on the sidelines of the field. Shoot as close as you safely can, and without, of course, obstructing the game. You don't want to be on the field. Okay. Hey, I think you guys heard the story last week that I told about that. Equipment, again, you want as fast a lens as you can, as long as lens as you can. Like I said, I have a 2.8-200 I use. And then again, impact, emotion. Just because it's action photography doesn't mean we're not still storytelling. Storytelling is what photography is all about. It's visual communication. So when you're looking at your photographs and evaluating your photographs and choosing which photographs you're going to turn in for the assignment, specifically look for storytelling, impact, emotion. All right, now I'm getting on to 20 minutes here, and I know you guys don't like it when I record really long videos, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Please do send me questions if you have them. Talk to me as much as you possibly can about, access, tips, tricks, whatever. I want to make sure I'm helping you guys out. This assignment is due next Friday, so you should have plenty of time to get things set up.